Thank you for the invitation. This is a really unique opportunity and a beautiful environment, and great to have an opportunity to talk to everybody. I'm downloading a lot of things from our conversations. I've learned a lot in the last few hours as well, things that I didn't know, historical things, and so I really enjoy everybody's perspective, and this will continue throughout the week, hopefully. And one of the questions that I'm asked is, of course, we're in the run-up to the U.S. election. So what's going to happen? And Kari and Pal asked me to comment and talk briefly about the United States and their relationship with the State of Israel. And of course, this is front and center in terms of current events and international relations, geopolitics, domestic politics. So I will talk about that. I'm in a kind of unique position in that I've spent half of my life in Europe and half of my life in the United States, and I spend a fair bit of time each year in the U.S., especially during election years, and so I do understand the mentality of the American voter and American political attitudes, and I'll share some of that with you. But what I think is really important for this meeting is what will Europe benefit, or what will Europe lose depending on the results of the U.S. election, and how does this relationship that the United States has with Israel, how does that affect Europe? And I can answer a lot of those questions, at least give my opinion on what I think they are. So yeah, I think I understand the British political mindset fairly well. At least I've followed it for 30 years, and I understand the American mindset when it comes to attitudes and trends, so I can share that political side with you. So the first thing I want to explain is me as a voter. What am I voting for? When this election is really interesting for me because I've come to realize, as many people have over the recent years, that there's two Americas. I'm voting, there's two elections happening in my mind. There's the domestic election, and then there's the international election, or the foreign policy election. And in terms of the domestic issues, there's a lot of polarity there. There's a big difference in your choice of candidate. There's very, very different agendas domestically that could come to fruition depending on who wins between Trump and Kamala Harris in this case. First of all, I hope there is an election. Some strange things have happened in recent years, starting in 2020, where we've had dry runs of stopping society and delaying and so forth. So I hope there's an election. If there is an election, I hope that it's not going to be a fraudulent one. Which in my opinion, and it's not based on my opinion, it's actually based on facts, having been in Maricopa County in Arizona in 2022 for the midterms, where there was actual interference and fraud which took place. It's documented. It's not something that is my theory or my opinion. It happened, along with investigations into what happened in 2020 in the presidential election, which there's plenty of evidence, even if it hasn't been accepted by judges as having any standing in court. No one ever audited that election. No court ever audited that election, but there's plenty of evidence that there was foul play. So if there's a fair election and it happens, what is it going to mean? I'm voting domestically, big choice. Foreign policy-wise, I don't see much difference in U.S. foreign policy from Democrats to Republicans. There's a lot of continuity there. The difference is in nuance. The difference is in how the policy is sold, not in terms of what actually is implemented or what's the real on the ground. So vis-a-vis the issue with Israel, not much difference between the Democrats and Republicans. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris will deploy troops if necessary to aid Israel. They'll give them any kind of weapons or bombs that they require. There's an unlimited funding route for Israel and what it wants to do. So it's more or less a hands-off policy for both Republicans and Democrats. For Trump, it would be more or less the same. But domestically, there's a big choice. So if I have to weigh that as a voter, the foreign policy issue cancels each other out. The domestic one, there's a big difference there in terms of what could happen with regards to censorship, what could happen with regards, and it's interesting, there's a reciprocal equation going on, which is on the issue of Ukraine, Republicans tend to be more or less hawkish on Russia and more talking, at least publicly, about winding down the conflict in Ukraine. That's kind of a consensus on the so-called right. And I use those terms very loosely, as Thomas had laid out very nicely in his talk. But the Democrats are very hawkish on Russia and Ukraine. Conversely, on the issue of Israel, the Republicans are very hawkish in favor of Israel and against Iran. The Democrats tend to be slightly more dialed down, at least publicly, certainly on the Iran issue. You could say there's a lot more trepidation there among Democrats than there is Republicans. So, and again, those, even though they're different, they kind of cancel each other out. There's a real potential two nuclear events, potentially. So domestically, there's big difference. So I have to weigh those things up. So if I have to rate both candidates on 1 to 10, that's how I'm going to make my decisions. Probably going to be on a domestic. So as far as what you think about what Americans think about the world, I can tell you the average American doesn't really, they're not really engaged in foreign policy issues, aside from headline consuming and a bit of talk, a little bit of flag waving if the troops are deployed. But besides that, it's really the domestic issues and cultural, political issues that's going to determine the U.S. outcome in a fair election. Not unless a serious war breaks out, or a nuclear event, or a domestic terror attack, or something in the U.S. in the run-up to the election that might shape. Foreign policy could shape the election, but otherwise it's going to be domestic. They don't care about Europe, I can tell you that, and I don't want to sound crass or dismissive, but the average Americans still regard Europe as a theme park and do not care about Europe, do not care about European economies. They don't care about European politics. They just don't, and they're not really engaged in it. And they view the issue with Russia through a domestic political lens, Democrats being anti-Russian, Trump being a crypto agent of the Kremlin. That's basically how it's digested there. So the two things I think, so we have the NATO-US issue in Europe, then we have with Democrats having authored the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal. Those are two interesting things. That's the big Democratic set piece, is their solution to calm things down in the Middle East. The Republicans have their own, called the Abraham Accords, which was more or less midwifed by the president's son-in-law, the president-in-law, as we call him, at the time, Jared Kushner. And it's very strange. Now you have people like Amos Hochstein, who is Biden's energy advisor, is running U.S. policy in the Middle East. And he was also running U.S. policy in Ukraine. And most people haven't heard of this person. Jared Kushner is running at least the public relations side of U.S. policy under a Trump administration. But both of those were complete failures for different reasons. And arguably, the JCPOA, if you want to look at the actual effect of it, it seemed like the Democrats were pushing it forward. But then when you read the Brookings Institute reports on which path to Persia, authored long before this, you can see there was a plan to sabotage any Iranian nuclear deal and then blame it on the Iranians, and that's exactly what happened. So make of that what you will. And it's arguable that the Abraham Accords are responsible for October 7th, that it pushed things to a point, the normalization of the Gulf states, and that it's one of the, I think, main contributing factors for the desperation on the Palestinian side to make something happen, because the window of opportunity was closing for this cause internationally. So there's a number of other points. What are Europe's interests in the 2024 election? We'll discuss those throughout the week vis-a-vis the other issues. But with regards to Israel, The Israeli lobby goes right back to the 1960s. This is when a lot of influence and money started moving into it. But there's been a few developments in recent years that I think you can explain this. Both parties have an absolute whip line when it comes to Israel. One of them is AIPAC only started doing direct funding and contributions in the last couple of years. Before that, other Israeli lobby groups were putting money into the pockets of congressmen and senators, but now AIPAC got in the direct funding game. That's a big factor, I think, because this is how Washington really works. Money talks, and lobbyists run agendas and write bills, and this is how Washington has always worked. It's worked for big agri like this, it works for big defense, and of course it works for the Israeli lobby. It works for the Ukrainian lobby as well. So that's been a big change. But there's also been, I think, you have to understand, like, as an American, we're indoctrinated from a very young age to be pro-Israeli. And so myself, having a state education, and probably if I went to a Catholic school, it might be very much the same, or a private school. But your year 7 and year 8, history and politics, a large section of those years is spent on the Holocaust, reading Anne Frank's diary, and this is an integral part of the U.S. education system. So we're all kind of, and then taught about the story of Israel. We had to learn the songs in choir of the kibbutzes. Believe it or not, this is in Boston, in Massachusetts, where I grew up. So we're in the Catholic Church through Vatican II, and you see this kind of harmonization of Protestant and Christianity to really support the concept of Israel and the story, Judeo-Christian values. It's very, very integrated into American culture, religion, and politics. It's very strong. This is a fabric that's very difficult to tear or break. So when you add the financial component in politics, plus the cultural component, and then post 9/11, it took on another dimension, which is there's an anti-Arab and an anti-Muslim component that was really turbocharged after September 11th. And that added a kind of a clash of civilizations aspect to this polarity. And so Israel was then portrayed more and more post 9/11 as, and I put a lot of this down to the Israeli lobby, to the project from New American Century. You can look at the Clean Break document. You can look at all these neocons that came out of the Chicago school, Straussian neocons, and you can kind of trace the genealogy of this particular foreign policy in the Middle East, and a lot of it is at the behest and at the insistence of Netanyahu himself and leading Israeli figures and so forth. They've shaped American foreign policy, and we always thought, why is this? There's a lot of different reasons for this. We can break down the historical. I look at I'll sum it up and then I'll move on. I look at the creation of the State of Israel personally as the 10th Crusade. Okay, it's another crusade in a long lineage of crusades for Europe and the Middle East, but albeit for different reasons. That's the way I look at it. Instead of the Silk Road and it's the discovery of oil in the Middle East, so I kind of look at it through that lens broadly. But it's taken on a lot of different qualities since then. And where the State of Israel was an asset, I think, to the West and the United States, events over the last 12 months have shown it to fast becoming a liability. Mm-hmm. And so, in a way, that's a positive development if you want to see peace and prosperity in a warring region, but it comes with great risks as well. And as Pal and I were talking, the name Antonio Gramsci came up, and we were talking about the interregnum, the time between world orders, the period between empires. And this is where normal laws and practices are suspended for a period of time. And they said, when Gramsci said, a new world is dying, the old world is dying, a new world is waiting to be reborn. Now is the time of monsters. And you could say, historically, we're in that period of history now, between world orders in this transition period. And we have these two situations, Ukraine and Russia, NATO, and we have Palestine and Israel with Iran. And it is a very, very risky time. There's a lot of positives, though, that have come out of this. One of the things I'm very excited, when we talk about the demise of left-wing, the left, as it were, or what the left used to represent. And this issue of Gaza has been incredible, because I did not believe in my lifetime that I would ever see the streets full of millions of young people on this particular issue. We couldn't pay people to be anti-war protesters after let's say, the total annihilation of hope after the Iraq War. 2 million people on the streets in London. I was there, and it just decimated and created a lot of cynicism and division, which was exacerbated by the dirty war on Syria in 2011, splits within the anti-war movement and the left. This has been incredible galvanization. And when I see the new 2.0 version of Greta Thunberg, it's been quite amazing. And so she has found an issue that's real and that resonates with her generation, and people like her leading that charge. And, I always say to my conservative friends that when it comes to political conversations, and we talk about the new left and the old left, socialists and communists, I prefer having dialogues with old left and communists, because I know where they stand. There's no hidden agendas. There's kind of an underlying ethos and value set there that is pretty much immovable. And that's one of the crises I think we're having politically, is so many people on the new left and the right are so wedded to the politics and the groupthink around these issues, especially with regards to Israel. So they've tried to paint this in America, and the Douglas Murrays of the world and so forth have tried to say that the Palestinian issue is a woke issue, that these are pro-Hamas students, and totally disingenuous, but it's enough to bamboozle a lot of Americans into believing that. So they immediately get herded into their partisan camps, believing that to be pro-Palestinian is to be pro-woke, because there happens to be young students on the left who were fighting with Ben Shapiro and Douglas Murray over the years. Therefore, but it's a disingenuous analysis, because this issue has, for those of us over the age of 30, this issue goes back decades and decades. This is a long-standing international issue. I remember going to the World Socialist Forum in London in Alexandra Palace. I think it was 95, 96 or something, and the Palestinian issue was right there next to the South African apartheid issue. And so we had those speakers together with those speakers, and it was always seen as a kind of a common issue. Apartheid, Palestine, they always came together as a package. That was in my sort of younger student days. So I knew what I was seeing when October 7th, post-October 7th, and those of us who follow the issue knew. But it became a kind of new issue, and history begins on October 7th for certain people, just as history begins on February 25th, 2022, for those looking at the Ukraine and Russia issue. Of course, those of us who know better know that there's many things that came to that point to bring that crisis on that date. So that short attention span, America runs off that. That's the currency that Western Europe and NATO and the United States, they run off this short attention span view of the world. And that's one of the big tricks of propaganda, is to basically draw a line beginning in certain days. So it's Putin's war of aggression, Putin's unprovoked war of aggression, all-out invasion, and he just woke up one day and decided he wanted to reignite the glory of the former Russian Empire or Soviet Empire. That works. That sells. Just like one day it was all peace and harmony in the Middle East. Palestinians and Israelis were skipping through the olive fields together, having picnics, and all of a sudden Hamas just blew up on October 7th and ruined this utopia in Gaza, which could have been the next Singapore of the Middle East. That's the basic narrative that flies on Fox News, and everybody believes it. At least they tell each other that. It's a very convenient narrative. The truth, of course, is nothing could be further from the truth than that. So those are some of my observations on this issue. So I think there is a lot to be hopeful for, whatever the result of the U.S. election. I personally like having in America, somehow it does work to have a really horrible administration in power because it galvanizes the opposition. But likewise, when Trump was president for 4 years, everything he did, whether it was good, bad, whatever he said, evoked this visceral reaction from the opposition that exposed all the fissures in the establishment's power structure, that autoimmune reaction that Trump created. So that can be, I think, a good thing as well. So, but it is interesting. It is interesting to kind of look at this through the lens, I think, of the U.S. mentality, and I think those are the issues that I think are important with regards to what the European voters should understand about the U.S. election, about this issue of Israel. I don't have to tell you about the power of the lobby. This is well documented. But understand, I think, some of the roots of why this is such a central issue, how it's become such a prominent central issue of the American political identity. It's a very, very deep, interwoven political affair, this relationship. So we'll see. But yeah, my final thesis, of course, is that Israel's moving from being an asset to the Anglo-American empire to becoming a liability. And how that's going to play out, we'll see. But it is a very risky time anyway. But thank you.
Thank you very much.